Where are my hobos at? It's David. I'm in the Magic Library. 9 o'clock. Time to start telling stories from Voodoo days at La Casa Fabulosa. Check in and say hi if you're there. So, there's Charles. Hi. Welcome back. Susan. Eileen, Justin, Becky. Good to see you all back. Hope you all had a good day. There's Beth. Hello. Helena, good. Veronica, glad you're all coming back. Hope you all had a good day today. So if you're checking in, say hi. Let people know where you're from. Hey, Laura. There's Eileen again. Karen, good to see you. And we're going to continue. So tonight is night 14 from Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. Laura, hi. Lisa, Mitzi, Debbie, Christy. I didn't send out, and I didn't have time to make an event thing, an invite for tonight. It's the last week of teaching at the places where I teach, and so I've been busy teaching all day. Hey, Joni and Kathy, and getting final exams ready, so I'm a little behind on the comments. So if I didn't like or comment on your running commentary last night, don't worry, I'll get to it tomorrow, I hope. But yeah, I've been really behind all day. After next week, it'll be a little better. So got finals and all kinds of stuff going on this week. So hope you're all doing well. Hope you all had a good day. So if you remember, last night we met a couple more interesting characters. One of them was Frances. And I saw Frances last year when Frances invited herself into my house and kind of commandeered my house for the Antiques Club. She told me she was 84, and that was in 2000. So I saw her last year, 2019, and I thought, ooh, she's got a, she's like reaching the 100 mark. And I said, well, you're pretty close. You're getting to be, going to be 100, right? And she's like, oh, no, I'm only 90. So I think she's lying about her age. But, another thing, I forgot to mention this. Lucy Blodgett, so the one that was Frances's friend that she was talking about, oh, she's such a mess. Hey, Holly Rudolph. She died last week, actually. So if you're from Louisville, Lucy Blodgett, she was like the society lady. She wrote society articles. She was always at the parties and stuff. And she just died last week, or was it like 10 days ago? But just in the last 10 days, Lucy Blodgett died. So that's kind of sad. What else? There was another update I wanted to tell you. Don't remember. Maybe it'll come to me as we're reading. But if you get a chance, check in. Check in at Old Louisville, America's most haunted neighborhood. Hey, Amanda, Cunyada. And there's Shelby. Hi, Shelby, Michelle. There's Sylvia. Is Olivia with you tonight? I don't know. Okay. There's Sue. Yeah. Frances, yeah, she liked to use the term darling a lot. And Laura Houston, so back home in Wisconsin. Hey, Aunt Jane. But if you don't check in at Old Louisville, America's most haunted neighborhood, you can check in at La Casa Fabulosa or David's Magic Library. Hey, Sean. So once again, Sean Stafford, if you see Colonel Sean Stafford, he's the one, and he's Hunley Media. They're revamping our website, doing all kinds of great things to help us kind of spruce things up and, get back into things when the lockdown's over and we're back on the streets. If you're tuning in, normally I'd be out giving tours myself, but I can't do that given the current situation. So meeting everyone every night at 9 o'clock and telling stories, talking about old Louisville and some of the strange things that happen. Hey, Patricia, so from Lyon, France. Say hi to Patricia. And yeah, so we're trying to get the word out about old Louisville. So thanks for tuning in. Good to see all these new faces, a lot of old faces, which is really good. But so we left off last night with the Holiday House Tour. So since the 70s, they've been doing a Christmas home tour in old Louisville. So, of course, the first year we were in the house, they asked us if we'd be on the holiday house tour. And we had a lot of work, but they said, well, let's do it as a work in progress, you know. And what they were planning on was then like asking us 3 years later to be on again. So we were on in 2000 and then 2003. But this first time, there were still a lot of things to do in the house, but people were really nice. They loved talking about the progress we were making and things like that. But yeah, I had an interesting visitor. This self-proclaimed psychic in the kitchen was telling me she could smell the things that others could not smell. And maybe she knew something because she was identifying some things that had been happening in the house, like weird smells coming from the back room at the end of the hallway on the second floor. Hey, VG. So we might find out soon what that was all about. Like I said before, we're winding down. We don't have a lot of pages left. I'm going to try to milk this out for 3 or 4 more nights. So that's why you're going to hear me kind of ad-lib a lot and add in some stories and commentary because I'm trying to milk this for all it's worth. I think we're going to, be in it for another couple weeks. So I think we only got four more nights out of this. So we'll have to see what happens when I'm done with it. But so we're going to jump in with the next chapter, which is called The Evil Eye. Okay, and I don't know if any of you know what an evil eye is, but you're going to find out. So, The Evil Eye. So another Christmas had come and gone at La Casa Fabulosa, and so had another New Year's Eve. After the holiday excitement subsided, the chill of winter really settled in and things slowed down a bit. Oh, by the way, don't forget to tell us what you're drinking. We've been doing a lot of bourbon, but I switched over to vodka martini again tonight, so. Cheers. We might, if we hear the word hobo, remember we have to drink. So, yeah, Jill says to milk it for all it's worth. I'm going to have to do that, okay? So yeah, if you remember, we left off, it was just approaching the holidays, and now the new chapter, Christmas has come and gone, and January passed without too much out of the ordinary happening, although it did seem that strange smells and other odd occurrences intensified. Most days I would wake up to the strong smell of freshly brewed coffee coming from the kitchen, always when nobody had been around to make the coffee. Whenever I happened to venture to the little second floor room at the back of the house, a peculiar odor lingered there. Sometimes it smelled as if someone had finished ironing a batch of fresh laundry, or other times I could have sworn that something had caught fire and was still giving off wisps of charred wood. A couple times, once I called the fire department because I was sure something was on fire. Okay, during those months, if I wasn't teaching, I usually found myself before the fire in the parlor, putting the final touches on the manuscript for my Kentucky cookbook, or working on my ghost story collection. Since I was cooped up and not out on the streets very much, it was hardly surprising that I didn't see Josephine at all during that winter. Without so many distractions, I soon finished the manuscript. One morning, after meeting with an editor from the publishing house, I decided to stop off at Wagner's Pharmacy for a late breakfast. And if any of you are locals, you probably know Wagner's Pharmacy out at the track. It's kind of a Louisville icon. A sheet of slate gray snow clouds covered the sky as I got out of my car and walked across the street to the old brick building that housed the diner. Behind me stood Churchill Downs. The stark whiteness of the famous twin spires on the old wooden clubhouse contrasted against the dark clouds, and a long line of horse trailers was pulling into a gravel-topped parking lot. As I opened the door to go inside, an enormous stretch limo crept by, and I assumed it was headed to one of the main gates, where it would deposit its passengers. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with activity, and a waitress zoomed by with the steaming plate of eggs sunny side up with bacon and hash browns. Using her forearms for extra support, she held 2 plates in each hand as she maneuvered to a booth against the wall, and I watched her set the plates down at a table with 2 men sitting on either side, and when one of them looked up, I realized it was Godwin Goodwin. He had on the same getup as when I first met him at the St. James Court Art Show, the wide-brimmed hat, grandfather shirt, and black vest, and his 3 companions were wearing the same thing. Although a faint glimmer of recognition seemed to register when he saw me, he neither said anything nor acknowledged me at first. But then his eyes lit up and he waved at me before nudging one of his friends and pointing in my direction. When they all turned their heads, and in perfect unison, they put their hands out in front of them and drew an invisible circle with their index fingers. The din of conversation drowned out anything they said, but it was easy enough to read Godwin Goodwin's lips when he enthusiastically mouthed the words, "Church of the Iron Hoop, Church of the Iron Hoop." I returned the wave and made my way to an empty stool at the counter. No sooner had I sat down when the door opened with a loud whoosh, and a gust of cold air rushed into the restaurant. All eyes turned to see what had caused the commotion, and in walked a row of four identically and stereotypically clad Middle Eastern men. Each one was short and wore a white thob, covered by a black bisht trimmed in gold. On their heads were the traditional scarves known as keffiyeh, theirs in a pattern of red and white checks. Sauntering up to the counter and surveying the room, one of them turned and made a motion toward the door. A tall man in a tailored black suit entered, followed by another man, even taller, in traditional Middle Eastern garb. He was dressed all in white, however, and the headpiece was solid white as well, held in place by a piece of gold cord wrapped around his head. All right, excuse the interruption. I'm being summoned. No, not that. Ramon wanted to say hi, but all he was in his shorts, so I said no. Okay, he can say hi next time. So, for the span of several seconds, all conversation stopped in the restaurant as patrons took in the scene unfolding before them. But then the din resumed as they returned their attention to half-eaten breakfast and half-empty coffee cups. At that moment, a party got up from a large round table in the center of the room, and the newly arrived entourage moved in and claimed the space, the tall man in the suit keeping watch until the waitress cleared away the dirty dishes and wiped down the surfaces. "I'll tell him you said hello." Yeah, he's a hobo. All he was wearing was shorts. Okay? So when she finished, the main guy sat down and settled in before being joined by the other four, two on either side. The suited man remained standing, however, presumably to better execute his duties as bodyguard, and after they all perused the menus, it appeared that he acted as a translator between the men and the server as well. From the snippets of conversation I could hear they spoke Arabic, but there was no way to tell what actual country they came from. I had heard many stories about wealthy sheiks from Saudi Arabia and other lands making trips to visit their horse farms and thoroughbred farms that they owned in the area, but this was the first time I had seen such a sight myself. I remembered the enormous black limo out front and concluded it belonged to one of the new arrivals. Before too long, the waitress brought their food out, and the table grew silent as the five men tucked in, the tall man in the suit stealing surreptitious glances as he kept watch. I wondered if he was hungry and when he would get a chance to eat. I'd already polished off my omelet, so I got up and went to pay. The cash register was located in the back part, which had an old pharmacy where trainers and other people from the track came to stock up on horse liniment and other sundries. And as the server rang me up, I stood there and studied rows of yellowing photographs of Kentucky Derby winners on the wall, early Kentucky Derby winners. I was about to turn and leave when something brushed up against me at the counter. It was followed by a hand familiarly reaching around my waist and pulling me close. I looked down and saw that it was Cookie. "Gonna give me some of that wanted cookie!" He side-bumped me with his hips and flashed a lewd grin at me. Then he nudged me a second time for good measure and started laughing. "No cookies here." I politely disengaged his arm from my midriff, and I stepped aside to put some distance between us. "There you go," I said, pointing to a nearby shelf of snack items. "They got cookies right over there. Go knock yourself out." When I tried to skirt around him and get back to the dining room, he spread his arms and tried to funnel me in his direction. Some of that, wanted that, get some of that cookie? I don't have time for this. I need to go home, I said. So I faked a dodge to the left and then went right, but Cookie spun around and caught me by the back of the waist. A waitress who had come to ring out a customer was watching from behind the corner. Her eyes narrowed in disapproval as my eyes implored her for help. But instead of rendering assistance, she just shook her head sadly, like I was a lost cause. And she went back to making change for the old couple who stood there. They also shook their heads at me in consternation. Seriously? I thought to myself, they're looking at me like I'm the weirdo? I swatted at him, but Cookie, who hadn't stopped laughing, hung on and splayed his legs to slow me down, and before I knew it, there I was, dragging him along behind me as I tried to make my getaway. Come on, I said. Let go of me right now. I slowly tried to pry his hands loose. Yee-haw! He cried in a throaty giggle. Gonna get him some of that cookie. With a mighty shrug, I was finally able to dislodge him from my person, and when he came at me again, I put up my arms and shoved him to a stop. I turned to leave without another word, but I almost collided with one of the 4 Middle Eastern men. I don't know how long the guy had been watching, but when Cookie made a move to come after me again, the man stepped in between us, and he shook an angry finger at Cookie. Startled, Cookie jumped back and mustered an indignant look. Better not get some of that cookie, he said in a somewhat petulant tone. Finger still angrily shaking, the Middle Eastern man took a step closer and began shouting at Cookie in Arabic, I assume. I've only had a few lessons in the language, but the first part of his rant sounded like something like Valdrut, Valdrut, and I stood by as the man continued to scold Cookie. Akmala baka inta asham baka bakawala shama uta, or something like that. Devil tricker, Cookie said. Gonna give me some of that devil trick, Cookie. Nik jeda kamalaka malawaka akamakalapa, said the Middle Eastern man, or at least something like that. Akmala bak yourself, said Cookie, and he took another step backward and raised a hand to deflect the wagging finger. The Middle Eastern man suddenly broke off his cursing and knitted his eyebrows in confusion. Then he raised his hand higher and began casting his arm down over and over as if a gesture of striking Cookie with a stick or some other handheld implement. As he did so, he resumed his angry cursing in Arabic, and I got the distinct impression that he was trying to smite his opponent in both a figurative and a literal sense. Ayiri fi ash mikwa, he said, or something like that. Kankersimmer, Kankersimmer. Cookie looked like he was going to say something, but he suddenly backed away, and that was when I noticed the tall bodyguard in the black suit approaching us. He gave Cookie an intimidating look and then slowly reached into his coat. Was he reaching for a gun? Was the Middle Eastern man really going to shoot someone in the middle of Wagner's pharmacy? Before there was a chance for the man to produce a weapon, though, if that's really what he was intending to do, Cookie put his hands up and headed for the door. Give me that one, gonna get some of that later, he said in passing. The bodyguard watched him leave, and after a dismissive gesture from the other man, he returned to the breakfast table, which he hadn't let out of sight. Pardon me, said the Middle Eastern man in heavily accented but easily understandable English. Oh, not at all, I said. I stepped up so I could continue with my exit. Thanks for your help. But before I could leave, the man smiled and laid a hand on my forearm. You must to take, he said. You must to take. Excuse me? Trying to pull my arm back without him noticing, I was struck by the man's singular appearance. Deeply set in a perfectly chiseled face were 2 eyes of a strikingly light blue color, and they fixed me with an intense gaze. Against the flawless olive complexion, his eyes reminded me of those of a wolf, and the more I stared, the more they seemed to draw me in. Sensing my confusion, he reached into his robe to extract something. I have a thing which can help, he said, withdrawing his hand from the folds of his garments. At first, I thought he was going to produce a pistol or some other type of firearm, but I quickly saw it was nothing like that. It was a colorful object, something dangling from a short string of beads. You need something to help you, and I will give it you. He tried to hand the item to me, but my look of confusion stopped him. Oh, I am sorry, but I see you do not understand, he said. Let me to explain. In all actuality, I wanted to leave the restaurant and get home as soon as possible, but I was transfixed by this man's eyes and the intensity of their eerie blue color. But I couldn't even come up with a verbal response, much less move my feet, so I stood there, mute, and nodded my head. I was born with a call, with the power of sight, you see. He raised his other hand and covered his face with it. A call was covering my face at the time of my birth. Do you know what it is, a call? Nodding my head once, I had told him yes. I had heard about calls. According to folklore, infants born with this very rare piece of thin membrane covering their faces often had psychic gifts, such as clairvoyance. Ah, good, said the man. Then you know that people born with a call have natural gifts, lacking to many others. He paused and smiled broadly. I can tell things by looking at people, and when I saw you, I could tell you needed something. He reached out and held up the object so I could better see it. Please to accept. Hanging from the string of beads in his fingers was a round piece of thick blue glass trimmed in gold. In the middle was a ring of white that surrounded a smaller circle of light blue with a black iris at the center. It was something known as a nazar, or the evil eye, and I had seen many of them at markets and bazaars during travels in Turkey and other countries. These talismans were supposed to ward off curses and other forms of bad luck, especially the ills inflicted by people giving you the evil eye. And as I stared at the vibrant blues of the charm and the beads from which it hung, I suddenly realized that the lighter blue exactly matched the strange hue of this man's eyes. At that moment, his eyes narrowed, and it was as if he were privy to the discovery I had just made. Once again, a broad smile spread across his face, this time exposing a set of brilliantly white teeth. Please to take, he said, pushing the talisman into my hands. It will help you with many things, things you may not realize require assistance. The cool surface of the glass pressed tight against the palm of my left hand, and I let him wrap my fingers around it before he disentangled his own fingers and returned to his companions. Thank you, I said in a barely audible whisper as his robed form retreated. Then I opened my hand and looked down at the amulet, the concentric circles of blue and white staring up at me. After a moment or two, I closed my fingers around the evil eye again and stowed it into the pocket of my coat. Then I walked to the front door and went back outside, where the stretched limo gleamed in the dull sunlight diffused through the thinning clouds. After I got into my car and pulled out of the lot, I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting a careless pedestrian who stepped off the sidewalk and bolted across the street. As if I were the one at fault, she turned and gave me an evil glare, like her own evil eye, and I saw that she wore a long skirt and a colorful headscarf tied with a knot in the front. Josephine? For a second, my heart caught in my throat, but then I realized this woman didn't really look like Josephine. Her complexion seemed too dark and she appeared shorter, but the more I stared, the more it did look like her. Had my memory dimmed her since seeing her last? Or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Chuckling at my foolishness, I proceeded to the next corner and took a left back into Old Louisville. Shuffling along the sidewalk to my right was Micah, the violin case, swinging happily at his side. So that's the end of that chapter. And guess what I have tonight for show and tell? That's the evil eye he gave me. If any of you have an evil eye, share your evil eye tonight. But this is the evil eye the Middle Eastern man gave me that night. So it hangs from a crucifix in my magic library. Okay? So, we can read a couple more pages. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I think I got 4 or 5 more pages we'll read, and then we'll call it a night. But once again, thanks for joining me in David's Magic Library. I'm drinking martinis again tonight, vodka, so I betrayed the cause. I went from the local specialty bourbon to the Russian specialty. But hey, you gotta be cosmopolitan sometimes. So everyone, if you're just checking in, let people know where you're from. Tell us what you're drinking. Say hi. And thanks again for joining. We're winding things down just a couple more nights, and we will be done with Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. Look at only that many pages remain. So, like I said, I'm going to try to milk it for all it's worth. And thanks again to people who've been helping us spread the word about Louisville Historic Tours. LouisvilleHistoricTours.com. You can get more information about the tours. Generally every night, 8 months out of the year, I'm downtown doing ghost tours down in old Louisville. During the day, we do history and architecture tours, but that's kind of on hold, so hopefully it will start up again soon, and you can all come down and see things for yourself if you haven't done it yet. But check out our website, go on TripAdvisor, on Amazon, give the tours, my book some love. It really helps. Thanks again to all the people who've gone on and given the tours and my book some good reviews. It really does help a lot. Okay? So, what was the other thing I was going to say? As I was doing the evil eye, I remembered what it was and then I forgot. But, oh well. I told you about Lucy. I showed you the evil eye. Skippy. Someone was asking about Skippy. Skippy's not on Facebook. His mother is. So if you see Edna May Holt, that's Mama Skippy. But a funny story about Skippy. He works at Brown Foreman. And, hey, Shannon, a friend of Susan Shearer. Yeah, tell Susan hi. I need to talk to her and see how she's doing. But, so Skippy's one of the charter members of the Thursday night / Monday night / Tuesday night dinner club. And, the other thing I was going to tell you is when authors do readings, they tell you never to do voices. They say, just read it. When I did my MFA at Spalding University in creative writing, we had special seminars and lessons about what to do at an author reading. And the first thing they would always say is, don't do voices. Just read it in your own voice. But of course, I've been doing stupid voices, so everyone seems to like them. So I'll continue to do the stupid voices, even though I'm breaking protocol. But Skippy, by the way, so Skippy was there all the time. And then, like I said, over the years, we've had a lot of people come and go in the weekly dinner clubs. And we're all getting old, so we don't meet nearly as much as we used to do. We still meet once a year for our yearly convocation at Slade, where we pull out the articles of Charterdom and all the artifacts I showed you the last 2 nights, and we induct new members and things like that. But so one friend we had, her name was Beta. She was from Bosnia, Herzegovina. She actually lives in Sarajevo. She came during the influx of refugees after the wars in that part of Europe in the 90s. And we met her working at the Seelbach. And so for a couple of years, she was like a regular at all our dinner meetings. And then she had to go back. She ended up going to Australia. And she might be tuning in. I've seen her on Facebook a lot. We're still friends. But so she went back to Europe, but she went via Austria. She was there for a couple of years and ended up back in Sarajevo. And one day out of the blue, she called me. It was right before, it was like the week before I moved out of La Casa Fabulosa. And people are asking why we moved. Well, tune in, like the last night, the last reading we do of La Casa Fabulosa, there's a little epilogue that kind of explains what happened and kind of gives an update. But I was going through the house, I was packing and stuff, and she called. She was calling from Sarajevo. And she had like a typical kind of Middle Eastern accent, you know, very direct and very clipped. And so she hadn't heard from any of the gangs in a while. And so she's like, oh, is still meeting Tuesday night dinner club every week? And I said, oh yeah, every week we're still meeting. I said, well, we're going to be moving soon, so I don't know where we're going to meet, you know. We'll be meeting out at restaurants a lot more until we get the new place, I don't know. And she said, oh, Wendy, how is Wendy? I said, oh, she's fine. She's got a boyfriend. I kind of updated her. Beth, how is Beth? I said, oh, Beth's fine. Yeah, and I updated. Laura, how is Laura? And Ramon, she wanted like updates on everyone. And then finally she comes around to Skippy. And Skippy likes to talk, and he's very opinionated. And finally she's like, Skippy? How is Skippy? He have boyfriend yet? Because Skippy was always going out, and we were like hoping he'd find someone. And I was like, no. So yeah, Skippy's still single. I think he's still looking. And there was a pause on the other line all the way to Europe. And then all of a sudden, Betta said, still too big mouth. And then we saw Skippy next week, and I love telling him that story. So that's kind of one of our inside jokes for the Thursday/Monday/Tuesday night dinner club. Whenever anyone brings up Skippy, it's like, still too big mouth. So if you see anyone commenting, still too big mouth, that's in reference to Skippy. Okay. But speaking of, still too big mouth, I guess I'll read some more. So, remember, I was out on the streets a lot meeting people, so we didn't really keep up with a lot of the spooky things happening in the house. But now we're getting back to the spooky things, and that crazy woman in purple, you know, told me to watch out for things. So now I'm paying a little more attention to things. But now is where there's a couple of creepy things that start happening in the house. So this chapter is called Creaks and Groans. Now, by the way, cheers. Let people know what you're drinking if you haven't done yet. So, creaks and groans. For the next 2 months, I completely forgot about the evil eye, largely because when I got home that day and hung up my coat, that was the last time I wore it for a while. The frigid temperatures seemed to lift and a minor warm spell hit the neighborhood, so I didn't have much use for a heavy winter coat. But around Easter time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go for a walk and maybe find a tree to sit under. As soon as I left the bed, Fritz bounded down and followed me to the kitchen. Rocky and Bess, on the other hand, were snuggled warmly under the covers, and they gave no indication whatsoever that they wanted to get up. I put on my winter coat and hooked Fritz up to his lead, and off we went. It was several hours before sunrise, so the sky still had an inky blackness about it, but already I could hear birds chirping in the trees. As I walked through the back alley to Ormsby Avenue, I thought we were all alone, but as I turned and headed to 4th Street, a lone figure coming down the sidewalk greeted us. "Want to wrestle?" she said with a giggle, tossing an extremely long hank of bleach blonde hair back over her shoulder. At least I thought it was a she. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Tina, supposedly because crystal meth, known as Tina, in some circles was her drug of choice. But whenever I talked to anyone, they never seemed to know if her real name was Tina or something else for sure, or if she really was a man or a woman for sure. Some swore it was a female. Most insisted it was a man dressed as a woman. Whatever she was, she had asked me to wrestle with her on the streets of old Louisville, and I stood there trying to figure out if this was code for something else or if she had just really indeed wanted to wrestle. Before I could answer, she started giggling again and gave my bicep a coquettish swipe of the hand. "No way," she laughed, her voice gravelly and hoarse. "You're too big to wrestle with." She looked like she wanted to say something more, but Fritz, obviously not pleased that the stranger had touched me, lunged forward and nipped her on the shin. And I quickly pulled him back, and Tina reached down to inspect her leg. "Ow!" Even though there was a certain note of concern in her voice, she was still laughing when she spoke. "Bad doggy!" Quickly, she determined no damage had been done, and then she resumed her trek down the sidewalk. "See you later," she said. "Maybe we can wrestle then." Shaking my head, I watched Tina's small and wiry form walk away, the ebony sheen of her face gleaming under the street lamp as she turned and waved goodbye. Almost reaching down to her heels, her yellow blonde hair swayed back and forth as she walked to the next corner. She jaywalked to the stairs of the First Church of Christ Scientist, went up the steps, and disappeared behind one of the huge columns. What the heck was she doing up there? I thought to myself. And then she emerged from behind a large standing sconce and slowly strode from one side of the massive building to the other. The light from the sconces bounced off her as she walked, and with the Grecian-inspired design of the church behind her, she almost appeared like an early high priestess keeping watch over her temple. When she reached the other side of the steps, she turned and promenaded back again, her long faux flaxen hair pulled around her like a cloak. But what was she doing? It seemed like she was holding something out in front of her, clutched in her hands, and that she was taking rehearsed steps as she walked. At that moment, a shiver ran down my back, and I was struck by something unsettling, a realization that just that week I concluded my research and had written a last-minute chapter about that church in my book about haunted old Louisville. According to local legend, the spirit of a beautiful young woman who died while waiting for her fiancé on the steps of the church still haunted it today, her ghost pacing back and forth across the portico and among the massive columns in hopes that the young man would come and release her someday. So if you all remember, the first week or so, that's when we did The Lady of the Stairs. That was actually the very first story I found out about, and it was actually kind of a last-minute addition to the book, but I had just written that story, and then she did all this weird stuff that looked like she knew something about The Lady of the Stairs. I waited to see if Tina would make another pass across the front of the church, but she never materialized. When she didn't appear, I half wondered if another group of swans would emerge from in front of the row of towering wooden doors, but that didn't happen either. Fritz and I looked at each other for a moment, and as I studied his intelligent and understanding eyes, I could have sworn he shook his head in exasperation, as if to say, "Oddballs, you've got him at all hours of the day down here in old Louisville." I reached down and patted him on the head, and then we walked over to Central Park. There we found a large sycamore tree, and we sat under it for an hour, Fritz in my lap and bundled on the inside of my coat. The neighborhood had a certain enchantment about it, the magical feeling that was so typical of the early mornings there. Other than for some restless squirrels and curious possum, the park seemed to be empty, and we enjoyed our solitude in the pre-dawn chill. We stayed there for an hour or so, and then we got up and walked to the northwest corner of the park. The tennis courts were brightly illuminated, and I noticed that 4 players were hitting a ball back and forth on the nearest court. The ball made no sound at all as they lobbed it over the net and then returned it, and I had to wonder what had occasioned the impromptu pre-dawn doubles match at that time of year. Walking towards 6th Street, I looked back and studied the figures at the net. That's when I noticed that their rackets seemed to be a heavy wooden kind used back in the day, and I also realized the athletes were atypically dressed. The men wore heavy V-neck sweaters and trousers, and the ladies had on long-sleeve blouses with sailor collars and pleated skirts that went down to their shins. All their clothing appeared to be solid white, and ignoring the chill that worked its way down my spine, I urged the dogs on and we made our way down to Ormsby Avenue. Less than a half a block from La Casa Fabulosa, I lifted my head and saw that a lone finger of rosy red had inserted itself above the horizon, beckoning the sunrise, as it were. From somebody's backyard, a dog let out a long and mournful howl, and a minute later, several others yipped and howled as well. Fritz perked up his ears and yowled his solidarity, and soon it seemed that every single dog in the neighborhood had joined in the chorus. As we entered the back alley, an eerie and enchanting canine choir sang us home. A thin band of fog was lifting from the patch of grass along the sidewalk we were leaving behind, and I looked up, and on a nearby rooftop, I saw a large owl clearly silhouetted against the backdrop of the lightening sky. A bat fluttered by, and a light went on, illuminating an elaborate stained glass window from the inside. It was then, strolling over the uneven bricks and past the old carriage houses lining the alley on both sides, that I realized how much I had grown to love the neighborhood, warts and all. So there's a little chapter break, and I think it'd get us another page or two, all right? So cheers, everyone. Yeah, that was kind of spooky, wasn't it? So if you're just checking in, tell people where you're from, what you're drinking. Yeah, I hope the owl was waiting for me, Joanne. Who knows? But that's what happens when you get out like 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I love to get up early and just like creep around. I love finding a tree, sitting under a tree and just watching. You sit under a tree, for an hour or two, you never know what you're going to see. All right? All right, so Fritz and I got back home. Back in the kitchen, I unhooked Fritz from his lead and hung up the coat. And that's when I discovered the evil eye in the pocket where I had stashed it after my breakfast visit to Wagner's. I hung it on a nail sticking out from the side of the cupboard, and I went about the work of testing a recipe for cinnamon coffee cake with bourbon streusel. By the time the sun had fully risen, the sweet smell permeated the entire house. As the coffee cake cooled on the counter, I opened the back door to let in some of the damp morning air. With Fritz at my feet, I stood behind the screen door for several minutes and listened as the neighborhood slowly came to life. "Why are you baking so early in the morning?" It was Ramon, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "It's a recipe for coffee cake I'm working on," I told him, walking over to the counter and cutting a slice from the still warm cake. "Here, have a piece." Owls omen in Native American culture? Yes, I've heard that, Michelle. Okay, so I gave Ramon a piece of coffee cake. He accepted it with a grunt and started eating. "What's that?" he said, pointing to the evil eye hanging on the cupboard. "Some kind of good luck charm," I said. "Someone gave it to me the last time I was at Wagner's." I poured myself a cup of coffee and blew away the wisp of rising steam. It's supposed to ward off bad spirits and things like that. Ramon shrugged non-committally and finished the last of his coffee cake. "Can it make you comb your hair and put on some decent clothes?" He gave me the once-over. "You look like a hobo again." Hobo. I know, right? He should get nothing, Eileen. He was a grouch. So I looked down at my pants and shoes. I didn't think my ensemble looked all that bad, but Ramon obviously thought otherwise. True, I hadn't combed my hair yet, but I wasn't planning on being seen by anyone, so it could wait. "I'll comb my hair later," I said. He put his dirty plate and cup in the sink. "Well, I hope you plan on combing it before you take me to the airport," he said. "I'm all packed and will be ready to go after I take a shower." Okay, then there's another break. I think another page or two. I'm feeling generous tonight, people, so I got a little more martini to go, so I'll read another page or two. A half hour later, Ramon was back in the kitchen, suitcases in hand, and we were on the way to the airport. Try to comb your hair every day and not to look so much like a hobo when I'm gone, he said when I dropped him off. Hobo. You get lots of hobos tonight. Afterward, I ran some errands and stopped to pick up lunch at Ollie's Trolley at the corner of 3rd and Kentucky. And everyone who's in Louisville knows Ollie's Trolley. So something of a fast food relic, Ollie's Trolley was a vestige of the days when the Ollie's Trolley chain had outlets across the country, not to mention a dozen scattered throughout Louisville, its city of inception. In addition to walk-in buildings shaped like bright red and yellow streetcars, the extinct chain's gimmick featured a secret blend of 23 herbs and spices, more than twice as many of the Colonel. And its legendary owner, a fastidious coot by the name of Ollie, insisted that his burgers be served only rare and only with his special secret sauce. Many considered the Ollie burger the best in the city, and that's what I got, eating it in my car on the way home. By the way, Ollie's Ollie burger, I was vegetarian for 5 years, and then I bought an Ollie burger for a book I was writing called 111 Fabulous Food Finds in Kentucky. And I went there and I bought an Ollie burger, just to take a picture for the book, and I ended up eating it, and that ended my 5-year vegetarian stint. So it was that good. So if you haven't had a chance, get an Ollie burger. So when I walked in the back door, I found all 3 dogs there waiting for me and anxiously wagging their tails. So remember, I took Ramon to the airport. He's gone to Texas for a couple of weeks. I'm home alone. I just stopped and got an Ollie burger on the way home, and I come back and the dogs are just waiting at the door. All right? So even though I hadn't been gone very long, they bolted to the door like they had been cooped up for the whole day. But when I opened the door, instead of running off to find a patch of grass to do their business, they ran down to the deck and sat and looked back at the house. And when I called them to come in, they stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me, giving no indication that they desired to return inside. Well, deciding to let them have their way, I left them outside and I went about getting some chores done. When I walked into the butler's pantry, though, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, lying on the floor next to the sofa, was the pig lithograph from the old desk that had been moved to the foyer. How it got there, I had no idea, but it was lying face down, surrounded by several large shards of glass. Shaking my head, I swept up the pieces and set the picture aside to be reframed yet again. Then I went down to the basement to check on the laundry. Yeah, that's true, Keith. They only accept cash at Ollie's Burger in case you're planning a visit. So when I tried to get the dogs to come back in a second time, they were still sitting in the same spot I had last seen them, all 3 looking up at the house. I called out and told them to come inside, but they refused to budge. Fritz stood and sheepishly wagged his tail, but that was it. All of a sudden, I wondered if one of them had somehow managed to get the lithograph down from the desk and dragged it into the butler's pantry, but I had to admit that it just didn't seem very likely. Finally, I went down and picked each of the dogs up one by one and brought them back into the house. The rest of the day, they seemed to stay close by, and they trailed me wherever I went. It was a strange feeling to have the house all to myself, and as I walked through the rooms and down the hallway, my footsteps seemed to echo more loudly than usual. The warm weather was upon us, but nonetheless a bit of chill remained wherever I walked in Widmer House. I toyed with the idea of doing some work up on the 3rd floor, but when I decided to get to bed at a decent hour, I jumped under the covers and quickly drifted off to sleep. That was something new for me, going to bed early. I had dozed for perhaps an hour or so when the uneasy stirrings of the dogs on the end of the bed interrupted a bad dream. I was having a bad dream about drag queens in a cemetery. Despite the darkness, a small patch of light from the street illuminated the bed through the window. I could see the dogs as they stood and looked toward the hallway, a low growl barely audible as Rocky and Fritz lowered their heads and stared. Pulling them toward me to calm them down, I listened. At first, I could hear nothing. But then, a long, slow wooden creak echoed outside my bedroom door. All three dogs cocked their heads and listened. I thought maybe a door had swung open by itself, and I waited to hear more. A minute passed, and I heard nothing, so I lay down and waited to fall back to sleep. Once again, however, a long, drawn-out creak resonated slowly in the hallway, and it sent chills down my spine. I thought someone had surely broken into the house, and I attempted to visualize his location in relation to the bedroom. Another moment passed, and I heard a third long groan from the floorboards in the hall, this time closer to the bedroom in front of me. All the while, I could see the dogs as they cocked their heads in response to the noise, and it slowly dawned on me that I was afraid. Talk about a cliffhanger. That's what we're going to leave off tonight. So tune in tomorrow night and we'll see if I was supposed to be afraid or not. So that was our 14th reading from Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa, my 12th book and memoir about my first year or so in a supposedly haunted house in old Louisville, Kentucky, set to be America's most haunted neighborhood. So thanks for tuning in. Let's see what happens tomorrow night. Like I said, we only got a couple more nights and we'll be done with the book. So this weekend will probably be the grand finale. So plan on either Saturday or Sunday night being the end of this. So let's make it a big party. And then when we're done with this, I'll be able to read a couple of other things. But next week, I don't know. We're going to have to see what we can do to keep things going. So thanks for tuning in tonight once again. Louisville Historic Tours. If you can help us out and give us some love on TripAdvisor. Thank Sean Stafford for his great work on our website. Check it out, LouisvilleHistoricTours.com. We still got merchandise rolling in little by little. We're trying to get the word out about this great neighborhood. Like I said, in the future, we're going to plan a reunion. All of us get together, maybe at Central Park in old Louisville, have a picnic or a potluck and relive our quarantine days when we got together every night at 9 o'clock and heard spooky stories about old Louisville. So looking forward to rounding out week 4 and seeing what happens once we edge into week 5. So thank you very much. Spread the word. Love having people find out about the neighborhood. Love seeing all the comments. Like I said, I'm a little behind on the comments from last night. Today I was doing final stuff and getting all kinds of things ready and teaching online. It's going to be a busy week for me because our classes are ending. But next week will be a little better. So like I said, you may not see it, but I read all your comments. And if I don't give you a heart or a comment, it's probably because I didn't pay attention to what I was doing, but I go through every night and read all the comments, and we're getting 500-600 comments every night. So thank you for the comments, and love seeing you all every night. And bring some new friends tomorrow night, but I'll be here at 9 o'clock, and look forward to seeing you in the Magic Library. So thank you very much, and thanks for helping me get through the quarantine hours myself. So love you all, and hope you have a good tomorrow, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you. Bye-bye.